The late afternoon sun stretched lazily across the quiet backyard of the Cartwright residence. The grass glowed a deep, summer green, freshly trimmed and still slightly damp from the morning sprinklers. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Cicadas buzzed faintly in the trees, and a single breeze rustled the hydrangeas that lined the wooden fence. Near the edge of a stone-lined pond in the center of the yard, a baby boy, just shy of his first birthday, lay on his belly. His name was Harlan Vexley, and he was dressed in a soft blue onesie, his legs kicking idly behind him. His cheeks were round and pink, his golden hair catching the last glint of daylight. But Harlan wasn't laughing. He wasn't babbling. He wasn't doing anything a baby his age should be doing near a pond. His bright, curious eyes were locked on two small, struggling figures in the water. Two German shepherd puppies, Rough Lynn and Colby, paddled in circles, their whimpers barely audible. Colby, the quieter of the two, was quickly tiring, his snout dipping under with each failed attempt to stay afloat. Rough Lynn splashed beside him, frantic but also beginning to falter. No one was nearby. Inside the house, Brielle Cartwright, Harlan's mother, had stepped inside for just a moment, to grab a towel from the dryer. She left the sliding glass door slightly open, convinced she'd hear anything. But she didn't. Outside, the stone around the pond was still slick from a spilled water bowl earlier in the day. Harlan, propped on his elbows, tilted his head and reached forward slightly, one hand hovering over the water. His chubby fingers trembled, unsure. He didn't know what drowning was, but something in the puppies' faces pulled at him, deeply. Rough Lynn let out a sharp cry, his paws flailing as he started drifting toward the center. Harlan inched forward. His small knees dragged over the stone, and he slid another inch closer to the edge. He looked around, nothing but open sky and quiet wind. No voices, no footsteps. Inside the house, Brielle was folding towels. She paused for a second, sensing something. She would later say it was instinct. But she shook it off, assuming everything was fine. Back outside, Harlan had moved dangerously close to the edge of the pond now. He leaned, stretching his short arms toward Colby, whose head was sinking lower. The puppy's glassy eyes met his, full of silent panic. And then, Harlan grabbed him. It wasn't strong, and it wasn't graceful, but the baby managed to latch onto the puppy's scruff with both hands. Colby whimpered, too weak to resist. His small body stilled in surrender. Harlan began pulling backward with all the strength his little arms could give. But his weight shifted. His legs kicked. His chest lifted too far off the stone. His balance was gone. 1 second, 2, and then the unmistakable sound of a splash cracked through the air like glass. Inside, Brielle's hands dropped the towel. The cold water swallowed Harlan instantly. The silence that had blanketed the backyard shattered into chaos. His tiny body plunged below the surface, limbs flailing as instinct took over, though he had no idea what to do. His blue onesie clung to his skin, heavy and soaked within seconds. The stone edge of the pond, once just beneath his belly, now felt like miles above. Air bubbles streamed from his nose, and for a split second, all he could see was a blur of motion. Rough Lynn twisting, Colby shivering, and the dim sun breaking into shards across the rippling surface. Inside the house, Brielle froze, her breath caught in her throat, and without thinking, she sprinted barefoot through the kitchen, down the hallway, and out the back door. Her heart thundered in her chest, but it was her gut that screamed the loudest. She didn't see Harlan. Not on the stone, not on the grass, just a splash, still echoing in her ears, and 2 wet puppies circling something that hadn't surfaced. "Harlan!" she shouted, the word cracking in panic. Her feet hit the stone and slipped slightly as she dropped to her knees. She barely saw Rough Lynn before plunging both arms into the water, eyes scanning the surface. Her hands groped blindly through the cold until there, a soft leg, tiny, sinking. She gripped Harlan's torso and pulled him up, water streaming from his face and chest. He wasn't crying. Not yet. His lips were pale, eyes wide open. Brielle pressed him to her chest and screamed his name again and again. Harlan whimpered beside her, as if trying to apologize. Colby curled up against the base of the pond wall, trembling but alive. Brielle laid Harlan down on the grass and began patting his back, water gushing from his mouth. And then, finally, he gasped. It was sharp and hoarse, but it was breath. Brielle sobbed in relief, clutching him tightly, not caring that they were both soaked, shivering, and shaking with adrenaline. She sat there for what felt like an hour, her arms around her son, both of them wrapped in silence. The puppies huddled together nearby. It was only then, in the quiet aftermath, that Brielle noticed something strange. Harlan and Colby had never been inside the house. They weren't her dogs. In fact, she didn't know whose they were, or how they had ended up in her backyard. And when she looked up toward the woods beyond the fence, she saw someone watching. Brielle's breath caught as her gaze locked onto the figure beyond the fence. For a moment, she questioned if it was real or a product of the adrenaline still surging through her body. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard. But in the thinning light, she could make out the unmistakable silhouette of a man, tall, still, and watching. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood there at the tree line, like he belonged to the forest itself. Her first instinct was to pull Harlan closer. His tiny body, now dry and bundled in a blanket, stirred lightly against her chest. She rose to her feet slowly, one hand gripping her son, the other brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. The two puppies, Harlan and Colby, remained huddled near the porch, both now quiet, as if they too had sensed the shift in energy. "Hello?" she called out, her voice cracking in the silence. But the man didn't respond. He lingered a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the trees with calm, deliberate steps. No rush, no panic, just gone. Brielle stared after him, her heart thudding harder now than it had when she'd pulled her son from the pond. Something about that figure, the way he watched without expression, sent a chill deeper than the water had. Later that evening, after the sheriff's brief visit and a long, hot shower, Brielle sat on the couch with Harlan asleep in her arms. She hadn't told the deputy about the man in the woods. Not yet. Part of her didn't want to sound paranoid, especially since no one else had seen him. But something about the stranger's presence gnawed at her, an old fear she couldn't quite name. She glanced out the window again, half expecting to see him there. Instead, her eyes landed on Harlan and Colby, curled together in a dog bed she'd dragged in from the garage. They looked peaceful now, but their sudden appearance that afternoon remained unexplained. Brielle had lived in this house for nearly 6 years. No stray dogs had ever wandered in before, not without reason. As she leaned back, trying to calm her racing mind, a sudden memory flickered across her thoughts. A letter, years ago, hidden in a drawer by Thatcher Rowan, Harlan's father. One he told her never to read. At the time, she thought nothing of it. Just a forgotten envelope, sealed with old emotions. But now, for reasons she couldn't explain, she remembered exactly where it was. And tonight, she was going to open it. The drawer hadn't been opened in nearly 2 years. Brielle's fingers trembled slightly as she slid it open, careful not to wake Harlan, who now slept peacefully in his crib. The soft hum of the baby monitor filled the bedroom, along with the occasional rustling of the wind outside. She reached beneath a stack of old manuals and utility bills, exactly where she remembered placing it. The envelope was still there, yellowed slightly, untouched. It wasn't addressed to anyone. No date, no return name, just her late husband's handwriting. "Do not open, ever." The words, written in dark ink, stared back at her like a warning. But warnings only work when trust remains, and after what happened today, Brielle didn't know what, or who, to trust anymore. She sat on the edge of the bed, the letter resting in her palm like a weight far heavier than paper. She hesitated for a long time, staring at the seal. She tried to recall Thatcher's voice, his laugh, his warmth, the way he used to hum while repairing things in the garage. But even those memories felt blurred now, dulled by years of unanswered questions. With a deep breath, She broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. The first few lines were confusing: dates, names, phrases that meant nothing at first glance. But as she read further, her chest tightened. It wasn't a love letter. It wasn't even meant for her. It was a confession. Thatcher had written about a place, a property outside Brook Hollow, where he'd gone every month for nearly a year before Harlan was born. The letter mentioned a woman, Juniper Claiborne, a name Brielle had never heard before, yet it was written again and again with guilt threaded through every mention. Thatcher described her as someone who helped bring something into this world that wasn't supposed to exist. Brielle stared at the page, her breath shallow. The lines blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She didn't understand all of it yet. But one thing was clear. There was something about Harlan's birth that she was never told. Something that Thatcher had taken to his grave. And someone out there still knew the truth. She folded the letter slowly and looked toward the nursery. Harlan stirred, a soft sound escaping his lips. As Brielle stood to check on him, the baby monitor crackled, and a voice whispered through the static. He was never meant to survive. Brielle stared at the baby monitor, frozen. The voice, calm, low, and unmistakably human, faded into silence just as quickly as it had come. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she lunged toward the nursery. When she pushed open the door, Harlan was safe, his tiny chest rising and falling with steady breath. The soft glow of the night light lit up his cheeks. His small hands curled near his face in peaceful sleep. She checked the windows, locked. The door closed. Nothing seemed out of place, and yet the unease crawling over her skin refused to fade. She picked up the monitor receiver again, holding it close to her ear, but there was only static now, gentle and aimless like white noise from a far-off storm. Still, she knew what she'd heard. The letter, the man in the woods, the dogs, and now this. It was no longer just coincidence. Something was unfolding. Something that Thatcher had tried to bury long before Harlan ever took his first breath. And whatever it was no longer staying hidden. The next morning, Brielle made a decision. She left Harlan in the care of Tallulah Bramble, her eccentric but fiercely protective neighbor. Tallulah had always been a little strange. Too observant, too intuitive. But Brielle trusted her more than anyone else right now. With the letter folded tightly in her purse, Brielle drove east, toward Brook Hollow, a rural area Thatcher had mentioned in the letter. The town was small and worn, the kind of place time had quietly forgotten. Wooden storefronts leaned from age, and a thin layer of dust seemed to cling to everything. At the edge of town, she found a long dirt road that led to a faded wooden sign. Claiborne Home for Women. The name hit her like a cold slap. Juniper Claiborne. She parked the car and stepped out, heart pounding. The building was old but maintained. Ivy curling along the brick, windows shuttered from the inside. As she approached the front steps, a woman appeared in the doorway. She was older, with sharp cheekbones and silver-streaked hair pulled back into a tight braid. Her eyes were piercing, as if she'd been expecting her. Before Brielle could speak, the woman said, "You're Brielle, Thatcher's wife." Brielle nodded slowly. The woman's expression didn't change. "Then it's time you know what he did, and what Harlan really is." The name Juniper Claiborne had been just ink on a page the night before. But now, standing before her, she was flesh, bone, and something else. Something unreadable behind her gray-blue eyes. Brielle followed her through the heavy door of the old home, into a hallway that smelled of lavender and dust. Framed photographs lined the walls. Young women holding infants, some smiling, others with blank stares. The silence inside was thick, not heavy with sorrow, but with secrets. Juniper led her to a narrow parlor, sunlit and still. She gestured for Brielle to sit. "Your husband came here in the fall of 2018, she began, her voice even but laced with something deeper. "He was broken, afraid. He spoke of a woman, his previous partner. She'd disappeared, vanished, along with a child that wasn't supposed to survive. He believed she was still out there, watching him, waiting." Brielle leaned forward, her voice tight. "What does that have to do with Harlan?" Juniper paused, choosing her words carefully. Thatcher thought the child would be born under unnatural circumstances. He feared the bloodline. He wasn't the father, Brielle. The words hit like stone. He never was. Brielle's breath caught. She felt the air leave her lungs, her vision narrowing. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I carried him. I was with Thatcher the entire time." Juniper's gaze didn't soften. "You carried Harlan, yes, but your body was manipulated before conception. You were part of something unconsented." Thatcher discovered the truth too late, and when he did, he panicked. "He came here not to hide. He came to protect you." She slid a thin folder across the table. "This is your medical history, modified, altered by someone on the inside, a former doctor connected to this place, someone Thatcher once trusted." Brielle opened the folder with shaking hands. Familiar dates, hospital visits, ultrasounds, but certain notes had been blacked out, others inserted in handwriting she didn't recognize. At the bottom of one form, a signature jumped out at her. Emberlyn Garrison. The name twisted in her memory like a splinter. Emberlyn had delivered Harlan. "I don't understand," Brielle muttered. "Why would a doctor? Why would anyone do this?" Juniper finally looked away. "Because Harlan wasn't born to be a child. He was born to be something else." Brielle sat frozen, her hands gripping the edges of the folder so tightly the paper bent beneath her fingers. Emberlyn Garrison. The name felt like a crack in the glass of her memory. For months after Harlan's birth, Emberlyn had visited often, too often. She claimed it was concern, a routine follow-up, checking the baby's vitals. But now, every visit replayed itself with a darker hue. The questions Emberlyn asked. The way she studied Harlan. Not like a doctor checking a newborn. More like a scientist monitoring a subject. She looked back at Juniper, her voice thin and shaking. Why would she do this? Emberlyn was family to Thatcher. He trusted her. Juniper sighed, folding her hands over her lap. That trust is exactly what she used. Emberlyn wasn't just a physician. She was part of a private research initiative decades ago. The Claiborne home received quiet funding from them for years. They called it the Purity Program. The idea was to observe, influence, and when necessary, alter the trajectory of genetics in utero. Her tone darkened. You weren't the only mother, Brielle. Just the last one. The air in the room grew heavy. Brielle felt as though the ground beneath her had begun to crack. What do they want with Harlan? She asked. He's just a child. Juniper shook her head. He's more than that. According to Emberlyn's last reports, which we intercepted, Harlan's neurological development is beyond expected, accelerated, responsive to things most infants ignore. His hearing, his memory, even his reaction to emotional cues. She paused. Have you noticed? How he watches people, how he responds to fear. Not with crying, but with focus. Brielle swallowed hard. Images flashed, Harlan crawling toward the drowning puppies, pulling Colby to safety without fear. The way he didn't scream in the water. How, afterward, he'd simply stared at her. Not confused, just aware. Too aware. Juniper stood slowly. If Emberlyn knows you've started digging, she'll come for him. You need to leave Brook Hollow tonight. And you need to find someone who still has access to the original records. There's only one person left who broke ties with the program before it turned dangerous. Brielle narrowed her eyes. Who? Juniper's lips tightened. Ridge Danner. He used to be Emberlyn's partner. Before he saw what they were really doing. The drive to Ridge Danner's home took Brielle deep into the northern edge of Brook Hollow, where gravel roads twisted through dense pine and telephone lines disappeared into trees. Every mile away from town felt like a step further from everything she thought she knew. The only sound inside the car was Harlan's soft breathing in the back seat. He was asleep again, peaceful. But even that quiet unnerved her now. It wasn't the silence of a baby. It was too calm, too aware. Ridge lived in a cabin set back from the road, nearly swallowed by the woods. Brielle stepped out of the car and approached cautiously. The place looked like it hadn't seen company in years. Shutters worn, the porch sagging under its own weight. A dog barked sharply from somewhere inside. Then the door creaked open, and there he stood. He was older than she expected, late 60s maybe, but there was strength in his posture. His face was sun-worn, his eyes sharp despite the lines around them. "You must be Brielle," he said before she could speak. Juniper called. Brielle wasted no time. "I need to know what they did to my son. I need to know what Emberlyn was hiding, and what Thatcher died protecting." Ridge stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. The inside of his cabin was cluttered, yet purposeful. Stacks of files, old photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes filled every table surface. He poured her a glass of water and sat across from her. "You're not the first mother who's come here," he began. "But you might be the last." He explained it all. The experiments, the manipulation of fertilization processes. The goal was to create children with heightened emotional perception and neurological control. Children who could interpret emotional shifts, even subtle ones, and react faster than most adults. "They weren't building soldiers," Ridge said. "They were building interpreters, emotional mirrors, children who could feel what others felt before they even spoke it." Brielle's stomach churned. "And Harlan?" Ridge looked at her long and hard. "He's the first one who survived without rejection. No illness, no breakdown, fully stable. That's why Emberlyn won't stop. He's the result they never thought they'd get. And they'll never let him go now." Outside, the wind shifted. Ridge stood suddenly and peered through the curtains. His jaw tightened. "They found you." Brielle's breath caught in her throat. Ridge had barely finished his sentence when a black SUV rolled silently onto the gravel path outside the cabin. No headlights, no engine noise, just the crunch of tires over stone. She grabbed Harlan from the couch where he'd been dozing and held him close, heart racing. Ridge locked the front door and drew the curtains tighter. "They always come quiet," he muttered, moving toward a back room. "They never knock, never speak. They just take." Brielle followed him down a narrow hallway that led to a trapdoor beneath an old rug. Ridge pulled it open, revealing a hidden crawlspace just tall enough to crouch in. "Go. Take him. Get through the woods. There's a path that leads to the old ranger station. There's still radio contact there, if the line isn't cut." She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll buy you time." His voice was calm, but firm. "I walked away from them once. I'm not afraid to do it again." Brielle climbed down carefully, shielding Harlan with her arms as they entered the cool, earthy darkness beneath the cabin. The trapdoor closed above her with a soft thud, and immediately, the world fell into silence. Only Harlan's breathing filled the space, steady and unnaturally calm, as if he knew exactly what was happening. She moved fast but quietly through the underground path Ridge had carved out over years of preparation. It led her to a narrow break in the foundation that opened into the woods. As she stepped outside, the air hit her face like ice. The trees stood tall and watchful under the moonlight, and the path ahead was barely visible. But there was no turning back. Behind her, a dull thud echoed from the cabin. Then another. Voices, strained, muffled. One of them sounded like Emberlyn, sharp, authoritative. Brielle paused, her body tensing. Harlan stirred. His eyes opened, wide and glassy. And then he whispered. Not spoke. Whispered, "Mommy, run." Her legs moved before her mind caught up. She clutched him tighter and plunged into the woods, heart pounding, branches scratching at her skin. Every shadow felt alive, every step louder than the last. But she didn't stop, couldn't. Somewhere behind her, the world was burning down, and in her arms was the reason they all wanted it to. She just didn't know what he really was yet. The ranger station appeared like a ghost through the trees, its silhouette rising from the mist as dawn began to break. Brielle's legs burned from the run, her breath shallow, her arms trembling from holding Harlan for so long. But she didn't stop. Not until she reached the heavy wooden door and shoved it open with the last of her strength. Inside, dust clung to every surface, but the equipment, miraculously, still blinked with power. She laid Harlan gently on an old cot and turned to the radio. Static, then faint tones. She twisted the dial, searching for any sign of life. "This is Brielle Cartwright," she said, voice cracking. "I need help. They're coming for my son. Please." Someone respond. A crackle. Then a voice. "We hear you. Stay put. You're not alone." She dropped the mic and turned back to Harlan. He was awake, sitting upright now, too steady for a child his age. He looked her in the eyes, unblinking, and whispered, "They're close." His voice didn't hold fear. It held certainty. The door creaked. Brielle spun, heart in her throat. Emberlyn Garrison stood in the doorway, flanked by two men in black coats. Her hair was wet with dew, her expression composed. "You've gone far enough, Brielle," she said calmly. "He belongs with us. He always has." "No," Brielle said, stepping between her and Harlan. "He belongs with me. He's my son." Emberlyn's face didn't change. "He's more than that. You don't understand what he is, what he can become. He was born from a sequence designed to connect human emotion with predictive cognition. He's the first, the only. He could save lives. Or be controlled." Brielle shot back. "Used. Studied. That's not life." For a moment no one moved. Then Harlan stood on his own, walked to Brielle's side, and reached for her hand. The light from the morning sun caught his face, and for a brief second, Emberlyn hesitated. Something flickered in her eyes. Regret? Fear? Memory? Before she could speak again, the distant sound of sirens broke through the quiet. The rescue team had found them. Emberlyn looked to her men, then back at Brielle. "This isn't over." But Brielle only held Harlan tighter. "Yes, it is." 2 months later, they lived far from Brook Hollow under new names. No cameras, no questions, just quiet. And though Harlan still looked like any child, sometimes in the silence, he would say something strange, something only a mother could believe. And Brielle would whisper back, "I believe you. Always."